In this lecture, we'll do a review on repetition structures.
So what we're going to do now is just review a little bit with repetition structures to make sure you have a better understanding. So the way we'll do that is I'm going to give you some examples and I'm going to ask you some questions and you're going to try out the code and see if you can answer those questions. So what I recommend is for each one of these examples and exercises is pause the video and try it out. And then when you think you have the answer, resume to check to see if you got it right or not. So here we have an example of a do-while loop. So we have CT, which is short for counter. It's an integer that's initially 0. We have a do-while loop that does some repetition. And then we finally, at the last line, we will convert our counter to a string and store that in a label that's going to display our result. So my question to you is, if you follow this code, what is going to be the output in this case? So we see that CT is initially 0. So we're going to go into the while loop and we check our condition. We see that 0 is less than 7. That is true. So we will go into the loop, and what's going inside the body is we increment the value of CT by 1. So that means after the first iteration, CT becomes 1. And we're going to keep repeating this as long as CT is less than 7. What that means is whenever CT does become 7, because we're just incrementing by 1 with each iteration, we will exit the loop and then display the result. So that means when CT becomes 7, we stop, we will convert to a string and store it to our label. Therefore, the output in this case is going to be 7. Here we have a similar example. The only differences are that CT is initially 1 instead of 0. And our condition is checking if CT is less than or equal to 4. So I'm going to ask you, what is going to be the output of this code? So as we mentioned, CT is initially 1. So let's just check the condition the first time around. We have that 1 is less than or equal to 4. That is true. So we'll go into the loop. We'll increment CT by 1. And we're going to keep repeating this as long as CT is less than or equal to 4. So when it gets to 4, well, 4 is less than or equal to 4, so we're good there. But when CT becomes 5, 5 is not less than or equal to 4. That's false. So we'll exit the loop, we'll convert that to a string, and then store that in our label text. So that means the output in this example is going to be 5. Let's look at this example. So here we still have CT, and it's initialized to 0, but now we're using a do until loop. So our condition is CT equals 4. So then we're going to increment by 1 if we go into the loop, and we will display some result. So take a look at this and see if you can determine what the output of this is going to be. So as we mentioned, CT is initially 0, and we need to check our condition, and because it's a do until loop, we would go inside the body of the loop if the condition is false. So is it false? Well, 0 is not equal to 4, so that means that our condition is in fact false. So we'll go into the loop and we increment CT by 1. So we're going to keep repeating this as long as CT is not 4. Once it becomes 4, then that means CT equals 4 is going to be true, and we would get out of the loop. So that means that whenever CT does become 4, well, it's true, we exit the loop, we would convert it to a string, store it into our label, so that means our output would be 4. Here is another example where we're using the do until loop. We still have CT as an integer. The body of our do until loop still increments CT by 1. We're still displaying the result. But take a look at this code and see if you can determine what the output is going to be. In this case, notice that CT is initially 5. So we made a change there from previous examples. And our condition is checking if CT is greater than or equal to -6. So we have to ask, is 5 greater than or equal to -6? Well, that is true. And since this is a do until loop, because the condition is true, we do not go into the body of our loop. So we just skip all that, which means we just print the value of CT or put it in our label. So in this case, the output is going to be 5. Here's another example, but now we're using a post-test loop. So take a look at this code and see if you can tell me what the output is going to be. In this case, we have that CT is initially 0, And because this is a post-test loop, we're going to go into the loop right away and increment CT by 1. This means when we get to the condition, we're going to check to see if 1 is less than or equal to 3. This is true, so we'll go back into the loop. In fact, we're going to keep repeating this as long as CT is less than or equal to 3. So this means whenever CT becomes 4, we're going to exit the loop. Therefore, the output in this case is going to be 4.